The Yareli build I have for you today is, objectively, among the most important innovations of the 21st century, along with 3D printing and cryptocurrency. Its power cannot be overstated, as its DPS is immeasurable even by the Fugaku supercomputer of Japan. In fact, I'm only sharing the build because the United Nations has informed me that it is a violation of the Geneva Convention for one person to be in possession of this much power. Since using this build I no longer receive veiled threats from the Stalker after defeating area bosses, Teshin has asked if Yareli would consider being his personal bodyguard, and Steel Path enemies have begun refusing to spawn out of fear for their own safety, instead simply lining Yareli's path to extraction with whatever they have available from their drop tables. Not only have I cleared the entire Steel Path star chart in 17 minutes using this build, but I also accidentally finished a new war and a few pieces of content Digital Extremes haven't even begun creating yet. Nothing you've experienced thus far can prepare you for what you're about to witness, and whatever you do with the remainder of your life will pale in comparison. Consider yourself warned. This is Hardcore Endgame.
Okwat Tangent Wan, my people, and welcome to the Hardcore Endgame build guide for... Script says Yareli, but I don't remember agreeing to that. Fine. Alright, here's the situation. This past weekend, Twitch chat told me that Asian Invasions and Nightmare Frame had been messing around with the Argonac dagger combo recently, and I made the mistake of wondering aloud whether or not it was strong enough to make even Yareli viable in Steel Path. And though it took a few hours of tinkering, we got there. But, and this is a Baru Lucas-sized but, this is not a wow, look what Yareli is capable of kind of situation. It's more of a, here's a bunch of stuff that works with any Warframe kind of thing, and oh yeah, Yareli is a Warframe.
Well, that's legitimately disappointing. I really will leave you alone forever now.
Look, what I'm trying to say is there's no special synergy with Yareli's kit that I'm tapping into here. But if you've been looking for a way to use her in Steel Path missions, this setup will let you do it. Well, so long as you can cover the entry fee, which includes a Yareli build with Helminth infusion of Koras and Snare, a Rakta Dark Dagger and a full build, a secondary like Epitaph and a full build, and an Argonac with its associated Amalgam mod. That Amalgam mod, by the way, is what powers the killing portion of this setup, and I'll talk about it in detail in just a minute. First, I want to cover her base kit, but I'm going to do it very quickly because, I'll be honest, it kinda doesn't matter. Her passive grants plus 200% crit chance to a secondary weapon, as long as she's been moving for at least 1.5 seconds. It's basically a free creeping bullseye mod without the negative fire rate, which is nice, but mostly a non-factor in this setup. Sea Snares is her first ability, and provides decent CC, but it goes pretty much unused in this setup because we'll be grabbing everything within Snare. Her second ability is the signature K-Drive Marilina. This setup requires lots of melee attacks, and melee weapons can't be used while riding Marilina, so replacing it with Koras and Snare is pretty much a no-brainer. Aqua Blades is Yareli's third ability, and the most useful portion of her kit in this setup. She creates 3 blades which continually orbit a 5-meter radius around her. Enemies hit by the blades take slash damage, and if they're hit by all 3, they also receive a slash proc from each. Slash procs create the bleed status effect, which bypasses armor and deals damage directly to health. So while we're using the Argonac dagger combo to remove armor, dealing with EHP from the outside, so to speak, Aqua Blades is also slowly working on the raw health we'll eventually have to deal with, but from the inside out. And in the 4th slot we have Riptide, which sucks. Enemies into a vortex.
Splashdown, sucked into a vortex.
Deals a bit of non-scaling damage, and then spits any survivors out all over the place. We want to group enemies, not spread them out, so there's not much of a reason to ever use Riptide. And the reason we want to group enemies is tied to that Argonac dagger interaction I keep mentioning. If you're not familiar with Argonac, and there's really no reason you should be, it's a gimmicky primary weapon that lets you highlight enemies, even through obstacles, while you're scoped in. Yeah, kind of like that. The only things you actually need to know about it for this setup is that its blueprint comes from your dojo's chem lab, and that it can equip the Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger mod, though I also have Amalgam Serration on mine for the bonus sprint speed, and primary dexterity for the combo duration. The big thing we care about is this. Damage from daggers reduces armor by 6, and this includes all damage that originates from a dagger attack, such as tick damage from status effects. So if we simply hit a single enemy with our dagger once, it removes 6 armor. But if we mod our dagger for gas and apply a gas cloud proc to that target, the initial attack will remove 6 armor, and each of the subsequent 6 ticks of damage from the status effect will remove another 6 armor. Now consider that a gas cloud can be stacked up to 10 times on a single enemy, and it affects all enemies in a 6-meter radius once it's fully stacked. So if we pull enemies together with ensnare, the gas cloud's tick damage is going to strip armor from everyone in the group. And then on top of all that, grouping also lets us hit multiple enemies with each attack, creating multiple gas clouds which can be stacked 10 times each, and all strip armor in an AoE with each damage tick. With all that in mind, it's pretty easy to understand how a group of level 180 corrupted heavy gunners and corrupted bombards end up with 0 armor after just 2 melee attacks. And even though Yareli specifically isn't part of what makes it happen, all she has to do is turn on Aqua Blades and stay alive to benefit from it. Again, I'm not saying this makes Yareli a great frame, or that it fixes any of her issues. Her kit design is still a mess, her signature K-drive is still broken, etc, etc, etc.
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it anymore.
Logan, just stop. I have to pee.
Moving on. So, that's why we're using Argonac and A-Dagger, but I'm using Rack to Dark Dagger specifically because it helps with that whole staying alive thing I just mentioned. It has a mechanic where dealing damage to enemies affected by a radiation status proc generates shields and overshields for your Warframe. It also generates the Red Veil Syndicate effect, Blight, and whenever that's triggered, you'll recover 25% base energy, gain 10% movement speed for 30 seconds, and all enemies within 25 meters will take 1000 viral damage with a guaranteed status proc. My build for it is a combination of gas, status chance, attack speed, and range, which allows us to spread gas quickly and efficiently.
Was that a fart? I don't know. I can taste it on my tongue.
And condition overload, which will benefit from the crazy amount of statuses we'll be applying. And even though Rack to Dark Dagger has innate radiation, we end up heavily weighted for gas in our build, making it an unreliable source of radiation procs. And since we only get shields by damaging enemies with an active radiation proc, we want something that can apply those in bulk. This is where the secondary I mentioned earlier comes into play. Epitaph's quick-fire projectile covers a generous AoE, has a negligible reload, and has 50% base status chance. Do not believe what the game shows you. It has a guaranteed cold proc baseline, and a primer build can include both radiation and viral without costing a single forma. If you want to match what I've got here though, you'll need 1 depolarity. Kuvan Nukor is the other top option, as it has innate radiation damage, 50% base status chance, and its beam chains to multiple enemies. You can also get a magnetic version, and then mod it for viral and heat to further enhance condition overload's effectiveness. There are other lesser but still decent options as well, like a Vermisplicer kit gun, Tenet Cycron, or Amprex, just to name a few. I prefer Epitaph, but you should figure out what works for you and do whatever butterflies your inner thighs. And that finally brings us to the actual Yareli build. I may have gone a little Jeffrey Goins with the range, using overextended, stretch, and auger reach, but this allows me to lock down an entire room and then some with a single ensnare. Prime Continuity provides enough duration that Aqua Blades last for over a minute, Blind Rage and Power Drift give those blades some bite, and Streamline gets efficiency back to where energy is manageable. Prime Flow is technically better, but it'll cost you another forma, and I honestly haven't found it to be necessary. As for survivability, Redirection may seem better than Vitality here, since we're constantly maxing our overshields, but in my testing, Yareli was far too squishy versus infested toxin damage, which completely bypasses shields. Vitality provides just enough of a raw HP buffer that you should have time to push your oh shit button, that'd be dodge roll by the way, to proc Rolling Guard and become invulnerable before toxin zeroes you out. Rolling Guard should also be used whenever you proc shield gating. Rack to Dark Dagger's shield gain mechanic doesn't work unless you have at least 1 shield point. So whenever you lose all shields, dodge roll, use an ability to generate a few shield points via brief respite, and then go about your routine to max out overshields again. As usual, the arcanes I'm using aren't necessary to make the build work, but Energize will get a lot of value since we aren't using Prime Flow. So there you go, Twitch chat. I hope you're proud of yourselves. Yareli now has a hardcore endgame because of you. Before Mesa, before Revenant, before Octavia. Harrow doesn't even have one yet, but Yareli does. Think about that. I want you to really take a minute and think about what you've done.